Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question asks if I can discuss the mental health and personality factors that may be at work in the O.J. Simpson murder case. Another question here is, was O.J. Simpson guilty of murder? Simpson is a former running back and actor who was tried and acquitted for the 1994 murders of Nicole Brown and Ron Goldman. Just a reminder, I'm not diagnosing anybody in this video, only speculating about what could be happening in a situation like this. If you enjoyed this video, please like it, subscribe to my channel, and consider supporting me on Patreon. I'll put a link to Patreon in the description for this video. So first I'll take a look at the background of O.J. Simpson, then move to the timeline of the crimes, trial, and then the mental health and personality factors. So starting with the background. O.J. Simpson was born on July 9, 1947 in San Francisco, California. His parents separated in 1952 and he was raised by his mother. When he was a teenager, he joined a street gang and was arrested several times. At one point, he was briefly in jail. It has been reported that after Simpson was arrested for the third time, he met Willie Mays, who inspired him to stay out of trouble. Simpson played football in high school. He was a running back. He married in June 1967. He was 19 years old at that time. He went to college and continued to play football. He went on to be a professional football player after that, breaking a number of records. He played for the Buffalo Bills and the San Francisco 49ers. His final game was in December 1979. In the late 60s, he started acting. He was on TV and in several movies from 1978 all the way through 2018, including 3 Naked Gun movies. He met Nicole Brown in 1977 and started dating her even though he was still married. He would divorce his wife in 1979 and marry Nicole Brown in February 1985. He was investigated many times for domestic violence. Later in the trial, the prosecution would present 62 separate incidents. Simpson would plead no contest to spousal abuse in 1989, and in February 1992, the couple would get divorced. They would attempt to reconcile after this, but Simpson's harmful behavior did not stop. After an incident on October 25, 1993, during which Brown called the police, their relationship ended for the last time. After this, Simpson would begin stalking Brown. June 8, 1994, Brown contacts a women's shelter saying she was afraid of O.J. Simpson. Now moving to the timeline of the crimes. June 12, 1994, so just 4 days after Brown contacts that women's shelter. At 6:30 p.m. in Brentwood, California, we see Nicole Brown attends a dance recital at a middle school. Simpson is also there. Brown then has dinner with several people at a restaurant named Mezzaluna, where Ron Goldman works as a waiter. Evidently, Goldman had been friends with Nicole Brown for about 6 weeks. He borrowed her Ferrari on one occasion, but he had told people they were not in a romantic relationship. Brown's mother left her eyeglasses at that restaurant. She called the restaurant to tell them. Goldman offered to drop off the glasses at Brown's condominium. 10:41 p.m. A man who lives at Simpson's Rockingham mansion named Brian Kalin, also known as Cato Kalin, investigates a thumping noise he heard on the wall of the guest house. So this guest house is next to the mansion. That residence is only a few miles from Brown's condominium. At 10:50 p.m., Brown's dog is spotted by one of her neighbors. It's barking, and it has blood on its paws. 11:01 p.m., Simpson is picked up by a limousine driver named Alan Park. He was parked at the house since 10:25 p.m. He was waiting for Simpson because Simpson did not answer the intercom at the gate. The driver did not see the Ford Bronco, but he did see a shadowy figure approach the mansion, where a bloody glove would later be found. Simpson eventually came to the front door at about 10:54 p.m., saying he overslept. Brian Kalin and Alan Park would testify that Simpson was agitated at that time. Now, Alan Park was there to take Simpson to the airport. Simpson had 3 bags to go on the flight with him. Park noticed that Simpson would not let him handle one of those bags. It's believed that the knife used in the murder and the clothes Simpson wore were in that bag. The limousine takes Simpson to the airport for a flight to Chicago that departs at 11:45 p.m. 12:10 a.m., now June 13. A neighbor follows Brown's dog to the bodies of Nicole Brown and Ron Goldman. Brown is face down and barefoot at the bottom of the steps leading to her front door. Goldman was found next to a tree. Both had been stabbed multiple times, and each had a few defensive wounds. The police would find a bloody glove, a knit cap, and bloody footprints at that scene. 4:15 a.m. Simpson checks into a hotel in Chicago, Illinois. 15 minutes later, the police arrive at Simpson's mansion and discover a bloody glove that matches the one found next to Goldman's body. They also notice that the Ford Bronco has stains in it and it's badly parked, with the back of the vehicle being too far away from the curb. Nothing erodes driving skills like committing a double murder. A detective called Simpson in Chicago and told Simpson that his ex-wife was dead. He responded, "Who killed her?" I think this was really just a slip of the tongue. Instead of the word who, he meant the word I. 10:45 a.m., the police, now with a search warrant, find additional traces of blood on Simpson's property. 12 p.m., Simpson arrives home. He is arrested and brought to the police station for questioning. The police notice that he has a cut on a finger on his left hand. He said that cut occurred when he was in Chicago. After being questioned, he is released. On June 14, Simpson hires an attorney named Robert Shapiro, who noticed that Simpson appeared to be depressed, which is a common side effect of committing murder. June 16, 1994, the funerals are held for Brown and Goldman. Simpson attends Brown's funeral. Simpson promises to surrender to the authorities on June 17. Initially, he was supposed to surrender at 9:30 a.m., but the police moved it back to noon because Simpson wanted some time to see a mental health professional about his depression. So, quite courteous of the police there. The police said that somebody famous like Simpson would never flee. Shortly after this, Simpson flees. He is spotted in his Ford Bronco with one of his friends driving. This leads to the now famous low-speed chase that was viewed by 95 million people. The chase lasted for 60 miles. Simpson surrendered just before 9 p.m. at his home in Brentwood, California. In the Bronco, the police found a .357 Magnum, clothing, $8,000 in cash, a passport, a disguise kit, and family pictures. So the normal items that anybody would carry around in their truck. So the police were pretty trusting to allow someone who was being charged with 2 murders to surrender on their own. And on top of that, they allowed him to keep evidence in the form of the Ford Bronco. So we would see no Police Work of the Year awards being given out in this situation. July 22, Simpson pleads not guilty. He hires what some have referred to as the legal dream team, about a dozen attorneys altogether, including Robert Shapiro, who I mentioned, Alan Dershowitz, Johnny Cochran, F. Lee Bailey, and Robert Kardashian. Initially, Shapiro was the lead defense attorney, but soon after, Johnny Cochran took over. Now moving to the trial. The trial started on January 24, 1995. The position of the prosecution was straightforward. Simpson had a history of violence toward Brown, he was jealous, and he killed her outside her condominium. Ron Goldman then showed up, and Simpson killed him too. The defense said that the prosecution was obsessed at winning at any cost. Over the next few months, we see a lot of interesting testimony from various people, including Mark Furman and Brian Kalin. Experts presented the DNA evidence. There was a sock found in his bedroom that contained Brown's DNA. Hair and fiber evidence also connected Simpson to the crime. And on June 15, 1995, we see the famous incident with the gloves. Simpson tries them on as per the instructions of the prosecution, and he declares they are too tight, which would lead to the famous phrase used by Johnny Cochran on September 28 in his closing arguments, "If it doesn't fit, you must acquit," beating out the prosecution's less catchy phrase that went unused, "How on earth can you believe this guy didn't do it?" The defense essentially said that the police did a terrible job. The crime scene was contaminated, so the DNA evidence was not good. One of the many defense witnesses was the famous forensic pathologist Michael Baden. He challenged the timeline, saying that the murders occurred at 11 p.m., which of course means that Simpson could not have committed the crime. He had an alibi for that particular time. Baden said that the coroner made over 30 errors during the autopsies of Brown and Goldman. The defense also had a theory that law enforcement was in a conspiracy to frame Simpson. October 3, 1995, the jury returned a verdict of not guilty on both counts after deliberating for less than 4 hours. In 2008, Simpson was convicted of several felonies, including armed robbery, because of an attempt to steal sports memorabilia that he had signed and claimed belonged to him. The crime was committed in Las Vegas. He was sentenced to prison and released in 2017. Now moving to the mental health and personality factors. So Simpson has an interesting story. He had tough times when he was young, but due to his athletic talent, he was able to become exceedingly wealthy and develop a pretty good career in acting. Outside of his youthful indiscretions, the problem here seems to be that he was controlling and harmful toward Nicole Brown. This was really a horrible relationship. He repeatedly threatened and assaulted her and eventually would murder her. So the question becomes, was Simpson psychopathic and narcissistic, and the murders occurred simply because he couldn't get what he wanted? So put another way, were the murders simply an expected outcome based on his personality, or was this really a moment of rage that was atypical? So he just lost control in that moment, but it was not consistent with his personality. Well, I think the behavior we see here better aligns with personality as opposed to an isolated failure to regulate emotions. We see later on he commits a number of felonies, so it seems to establish a bit of an antisocial pattern. This seems to be a case where somebody has a lot of power combined with a sense of entitlement, a need to dominate, a desire to be admired, and aggressiveness. So really just a bad combination of factors. As far as the report of depressed mood and his threats to end his own life during the Bronco chase, one could make an argument for some type of mood disorder. I've heard theories about major depressive disorder and bipolar disorder. These symptoms could also be explained, though, by narcissism. Narcissists often have symptoms of depression when they can't get their way. He couldn't have Nicole, so he kills her so that nobody can have her. Then he is faced with the threat of life in prison, so he says he will end his own life. Nobody is going to put him in prison. No one's going to hold him accountable. The classic personality profile of a stalker who escalates to murder involves vulnerable narcissism, a person who cannot handle rejection, who won't stand for it. It's too painful, too insulting, too embarrassing. They start to develop a need for revenge, and eventually that need expresses itself. So looking at Simpson's potential personality profile, I conceptualize personality through the 5-factor model. I remember the 5 traits through the acronym OCEAN: openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. So with Simpson's behavior, we see evidence of low openness to experience, not much in the way of intellectual curiosity. We see low conscientiousness. He impulsively committed murder. A mid-level on extroversion. He's assertive and dominant, but he has low positive emotions. We see low agreeableness. He didn't have much empathy. And high neuroticism. He's angry, depressed, anxious, and vulnerable. It's quite tragic that Nicole Brown had to suffer through this relationship only to believe to some degree that she had escaped it, and then she loses her life. So in reality, she never really escaped that relationship. The death of Ron Goldman is also tragic. He was essentially an innocent bystander, murdered for no reason except to allow Simpson to avoid responsibility. So this brings me to the last question. Was O.J. Simpson guilty of these 2 murders? During the trial, the victims were really lost. The focus became about celebrity status, race, and police corruption. Yet this case is extremely straightforward. It seems fairly clear that Simpson did it. The evidence, albeit circumstantial, is quite compelling. So I'll look at the evidence pointing toward guilt and then the evidence pointing away from guilt. Pointing toward guilt, we see a history of violence toward Nicole Brown, so Simpson had a motive. That missing bag, it's pretty strange to take 3 bags to an airport and only end up with 2 at your destination, right? So that's not a typical occurrence. What was in that 3rd bag? That makes him look guilty. We see Goldman's blood found in Simpson's vehicle. This is particularly damaging. The bloody glove found on Simpson's property matched one at the crime scene. It's hard to imagine it really gets much worse than that. The bloody sock found in his bedroom containing Nicole's blood, the cut on his finger, which he didn't have a good explanation for, and Simpson's blood is found on a gate near the crime scene. Evidence pointing away from guilt, not much. The essential theory of the defense was that Nicole Brown had used cocaine, therefore she was killed by drug dealers. After this, the police framed Simpson. So, kind of a weak theory, but one that ultimately prevailed. It seems reasonable to believe, with all this in mind, that Simpson was guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. If this is true, then the jury came up with the wrong answer. How'd this happen? There have been a lot of criticisms of this jury, many of them centered around this idea that the jurors wanted to find Simpson not guilty, as 9 of the jurors were African American, as was Simpson. So the argument here is that their decision was motivated by factors other than logic. Now, there's a lot of controversy around this. We see different reports. Some jurors said they made the decision based on the mistakes of the police and not anything else. But then we see other reports that are inconsistent with that. I think the prosecution did make a number of mistakes, and the defense was able to exploit emotions effectively. So it's likely it was a combination of both that resulted in this verdict. So those are my thoughts on the O.J. Simpson case. Please put any opinions and thoughts in the comment section. They always generate an interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you found my analysis of this topic to be interesting. Thanks for watching. So I was thinking of some phrases that could be used that were similar to what Johnny Cochran used in the trial. The "if it doesn't fit, you must acquit" phrase. And it's actually pretty hard to get the rhymes going for these. So I thought of a few. I don't think they're very good, but they could have been used during these trials. So the first one was for the Darlie Rotier trial. This case was about a 1996 double murder in Texas. In part, it was based on this idea that she cut a screen from the inside. So it could be something like, if she cut the screen, pronouncing her guilty is not mean. I had to work a long time just to get those rhymes, and they're not that good. Looking at the Hillside Strangler case, Kenneth Bianche, his case was really based on this idea he had multiple personalities. So you could say, if the defendant is split, you must acquit. Again, not very catchy. David Berkowitz, the son of Sam, he had allegedly heard commands from a dog. That was disputed later on, but that was the thinking during his trial. So there's something like, if the dog's voice did not afflict, you must convict. It's really hard to find things that rhyme with convict. And then we see the Michael Peterson case, 2001 murder in North Carolina. Part of his defense was how much he cried when he called the police. And part of his defense that wasn't really used was this idea that maybe an owl committed the murder. So we could see something like, if the defendant howls, it must be an owl. That's what I came up with after probably an hour of thinking about it. So I have to give credit to Johnny Cochran. He had a pretty good idea there with that phrase he used in Simpson's trial.